Hello friends and greetings for the day. Welcome back to another tutorial on ISTQB Advanced Level Test Analyst Certification. We are getting started with Chapter 2 talking about the task of Test Analyst in Risk-Based Testing. And today we shall be covering the first segment, that is 2.1, that is Risk Analysis, and understanding what exactly are the activities which happen as a part of risk analysis and what a test analyst would be responsible for. As a part of our foundation level syllabus, we have discussed a deep dive into this topic called as risk-based testing, where we understood all the four major phases, that is risk identification, risk assessment, risk mitigation, and risk monitoring. And here, in fact, this chapter is much more lightweight than that of the foundation because they don't want to repeat the same thing again here, but they will be just adding more, which we have not discussed in the foundation. So this chapter is going to be the smallest chapter in our entire syllabus. Okay. And you just need to recall more about the foundation. Rather, you just have to read this topic once again and you are done with this particular chapter. So keeping it very short and to the point, that the 2.1 is talking about the risk analysis. Now, risk analysis is certainly the major part of it. Okay, we basically divide our risk-based testing into two categories or two major phases, that is risk analysis and risk control, where risk analysis talks about the identification and assessment, and risk controls talk about the mitigation and the monitoring. So of course, the same thing is here. The risk analysis involves identification and assessment, and this syllabus focuses on how the test analyst should participate in risk analysis to ensure risk-based testing is implemented correctly. Now, the test analyst often possesses unique knowledge of the system as well as experience and intuitive knowledge of what usually goes wrong, what impact it has, and how testing can mitigate the risk. This makes the test analyst a valuable stakeholder for product risk analysis. Now, few important things to worry about is number one, they just clearly told you that you are an active contributor to the risk-based testing. So it's not that if you're not participating, things would be great. So if in case you are invited or you have not been invited, you still need to look into that, why I'm not being invited. Being one, you are a tester, you're always good at finding problems. Second, being a senior resource, you have great experience and you can always contribute to it. So mostly 99.9% you would be invited to such events. But if in case you are not being invited, just make sure that someone from your team is getting invited. For example, maybe someone senior than you would be invited, and maybe you're just being a junior resource compared to that person. That's the reason you're not invited, right? But test analysts have contributions to make because of their wide experience, and they know what exactly to, you know, see as a risk, and at the same time, what test activities would be relevant to mitigate them. And that is where we become very crucial to participate as a part of the risk identification and assessment. Also, to add here, of course, in risk identification as the first part, the test analyst contributes with their own experience and knowledge to the retrospectives, risk workshop, brainstorming, and creative checklist. Creating checklists, the test analyst can also conduct interviews with stakeholders to better understand what they consider to be the most significant risk from their perspective. Indeed, this entire line has been discussed in very detail in the foundation level, where we told you that what are the different techniques which we can make use of to identify the risk. In simple words, we can interview experts, like talking to them can get you more information, make use of checklist, brainstorming, calling on the past experience, attending certain risk workshops, or making use of risk templates could also be one of the techniques. So a technical test analyst is someone who is responsible to make use of these techniques to bring out the most potential list of risk, which would be great for entire team to list out the risk possible, and based on that they can do the required assessment. And that's exactly the next part of it is. The next point is during the risk assessment, the test analyst together with other stakeholder contributes to determine the risk level by estimating several factors such as frequency of use, criticality of the affected feature, criticality of the affected business objective, financial, environmental, and reputational damage, quality of the test basis we have, legal or safety needs. So all these factors are basically one way, I would say, are the constraints which determine the impact, okay, or determines the likelihood, or also tells you that what would be the consequences if in case we don't mitigate the risk. And collectively, all three things together, that is the likelihood, the impact, and of course the consequences, would result into a proper assessment. So as a part of assessment, we say that we determine the level of risk. By determining the level of risk, you're defining the risk importance, risk significance, and the level of risk is determined by two major factors, that is likelihood and impact, where likelihood is the probability of that event to happen and impact is of course the harm. The next thing to add here, of course, is to talk about a deeper dive. So here the test analyst also helps categorize product risk by the quality characteristics impact. For example, using the product quality model of ISO IEC 25010, where we can simply tell you that we are talking about usability, performance, interoperability, accessibility, portability, and many more things like that. Security, compatibility, whatnot. So all those sub quality characteristics and sub quality characteristics fall into ISO 25010 itself. Okay, so we are someone who is responsible to classify them or categorize the product risk into specific quality characteristics. The next thing to add here, of course, is the risk level is often not uniformly distributed across the test object. In such cases, the test analyst should break down the test object into test items and assess a given risk for each test item separately. So doing it collectively could be a bigger chunk of work. So we just want to make sure that we are trying them independently so that it can be better assessment. And at the end of the day, we know exactly the problem statement from each of the test object. Also to add here, finally, as part of the product risk assessment, a test analyst proposes the suitable test activities to mitigate each identified product risk. In simple words, if you remember from the foundation, we told you also that as a part of risk assessment itself, we propose the recommended solution. Many people have this confusion that isn't that mitigation is the place where we write the solutions? No, you only implement. That means you run. For example, here you can propose that which test level you want to use to mitigate that risk, or which test technique you should use to mitigate that risk. And in mitigation, you will do that. So as a part of assessment, we propose the solution. Additionally, to add here, of course, these activities may include static testing, dynamic testing, depending on the factors such as risk level, the associated test item type, the quality characteristic affected, or a TA indicate the required test levels, test types, test techniques, level of independence, and the required throughout testing. So in simple words, these are proposed solutions. Risk can be mitigated either by conducting a test level, using a test technique, amount of testing, proportional amount of testing, or all of the things what we have in the testing. So one of these activity itself becomes our mitigation action, and that is what the test analyst proposes in order to mitigate a risk. Finally, to conclude, of course, in the spirit of shift left, the test analyst indicates which test activities can mitigate the risk earliest to minimize the testing effort. So simple to keep. Of course, we are talking about the prioritization. Okay, as a part of this risk assessment process, when we are proposing solutions, we also try to prioritize our solutions that what can be done earliest in the phase to mitigate this risk as soon as possible. Because the later we identify it, it could be expensive, as good as just like a defect. The earlier you find it is cheaper, the later you find it is expensive. Same way, the risk it is mitigated earlier is cheaper to resolve, but if in case mitigated later or found later, it could be expensive to handle. That's where we also look forward to use this risk data to prioritize our test activities and do as early as possible in the life cycle to handle the risk better. Well, that's all from this small topic to talk about, and I hope I'm very clear with that. Should you have anything else, feel free to comment below. I'm always there to address your queries and answer them well. Till then, keep learning, keep exploring, keep understanding the context. Thanks for watching the video, team, and happy learning.